Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Nick Hinton. Full name is Nick D. Hinton, Hinton, and he has written published two books, self-published books, and has more books on the way. His earlier books were the Saturn Time Cube Simulation. You can see that on YouTube or Rockfin. And I just kind of got out of the timeout that YouTube put me on for. I forgot what it was, insulting somebody. I was harassing somebody that through a show I did with John Brisson. It's just totally ridiculous. But I was on a 2-week timeout. So I have 2 strikes on YouTube. This will be my third channel. That's once they get rid of me for something else. It'll be the third channel. The second channel I can't even get in. It's up. And the first channel they got rid of and destroyed 5 years of my work. So, and it probably was done, if the Twitter files are correct, they probably, somebody from the government, from this corrupt administration, Biden administration, probably had them erase that. So anyway, this is also on Rockfin. You can go on Rockfin. They haven't censored me in any way. I don't even swear in any of my shows, by the way. But so Rockfin, and all of my shows are on my podcast. It's William Ramsey Investigates. The shows that I'm on as well. So the shows that invite me on to talk about their book. So just to get that out of the way. But Nick has done a lot of work on Twitter. He has a lot of threads, very popular threads. He's been very busy this month. It's December 27th, 2022. He was on a lot of shows this month. So I was listening to him. He was on a friend of mine show, Conspiracy or Just a Coincidence. He was on with Mike Gadank. I listened to one with Jay Dyer and some other shows that I wasn't really familiar with, but really interesting information. And I was trying to read through all of his links, and some of the stuff that he's researched is what I've researched. I just did a private video for my Patreons titled "Word is the Word," WYRD, which is an old English term for kind of weird, or also fate. And it ties into the ONA, the Order of Nine Angles. And really, one of their central concepts is the tree of word, or the tree of fate. And you ascend the tree of word when you go through the septenary 7-part system. So I did a show on that, about the kind of the advent of these kind of neo-pagan occult cells that are, I don't recall ever being extant, but they are around. So you can check that out on Patreon. But again, my special guest is Nick Hinton. You can find him on Twitter at Nick Hinton with 2 N's. And I'm delighted to have him. So Nick, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, man. This is really cool for me because, I started off as a fan and now our worlds are colliding. So that's pretty cool for me.
Cool, man. Well, I really interesting research. Some of the stuff, I'm curious about it, the black cubes and the Saturn worship and things like that. But for people who may not have heard your earlier shows, can you kind of talk about your history, your research, and kind of what led you up to writing the Saturn Time Cube and the Aquarian Singularity?
Sure. So, this all kind of started a long time ago, like probably age 15 or 16. I started looking for answers, and I found all the YouTube videos about Denver airport, stuff like Zeitgeist, which now I think was probably planted there on purpose. But I got indoctrinated into the conspiracy culture movement very early on, and I ended up finding through that the stuff about Saturn, and that was around age 19, and I took a break from school after I graduated, and just kind of dropped everything for a while, like conspiracy wise. It's kind of driving me crazy, and so I just dropped everything for a while. But while taking a break from school and just working a regular job, I was doing landscaping, and I just wasn't satisfied with any of it because I felt like I was just staying in one place, not really going anywhere. I didn't want to use my body that way for the rest of my life. So I was like, I'm going to use my mind for a job. I'm going to figure out how to use my mind. So I got back into school. I went to college for philosophy, and during that time I started learning how to articulate ideas and creating coherent arguments. So I started writing essays for fun about all the stuff that I was researching back when I was indulging in conspiracy stuff, and I started posting them to Reddit and Twitter, and they went viral. And then I decided to start writing books because, I always had that dream of using my mind as my profession. And So that's kind of how it all happened. It was a very long process. Um, but yeah, so the first thing that I did post that went viral was this Saturn time cube idea, which I don't want to go super deep into it just because I've talked about it like a lot.
Mhm.
But basically, I noticed all these weird idiosyncrasies between Saturn, Kronos, and um, symbolism in ancient culture and even pop culture. So they're supposedly, at least according to NASA, we all know that, whatever they're showing us is most likely fake and just total CGI. But so according to NASA, there's supposedly this giant hexagonal storm on Saturn's North Pole. And when I found that out years ago, I was like, what the hell? Why are people not talking about this? This seems like something everyone should be talking about, because scientists apparently don't know why this thing is there. Well, there's all sorts of crazy conspiracy theories about why it's there. Some say it's like some kind of frequency within the planet is creating it. I'm pretty sure Terrence McKenna's brother was on a podcast talking about it being created by some kind of wormhole. Whatever. I don't necessarily believe that, but the hexagon is essentially a two-dimensional view of a three-dimensional cube. Like everyone might remember, being in school and doodling like a hexagon on their paper and drawing lines on the inside of it to make a cube. So the reason that's interesting is because there's all these black cubes found throughout different religions and cultures that are altars to the god of Saturn. There's even an altar to the god of everything in the UN meditation room, which is a giant black cube. And then you have places like Mecca, where there's a giant black cube. People walk around counterclockwise, the same direction that the rings supposedly go around. Then there's Jewish people who wear tefillin, which are black cubes on their wrist and on their head. So there's all these different black cubes that I was beginning to notice. And like I said, the hexagon is another version of the cube, and there's a lot more symbolism associated with the hexagon as well. But in Greek mythology, you have Saturn associated with Kronos, the god of time. And you also have this thing appearing in pop culture right now, the Tesseract, or the time cube, which is a four-dimensional cube, the fourth dimension being time. And so this book, The Saturn Time Cube, kind of goes into all of that stuff and how there's been other conspiracy theorists besides myself who have claimed that we might be in some kind of Tesseract simulation that's being projected by whatever alien devices inside Saturn. And I don't necessarily believe that anymore because my ideas are constantly evolving. And actually that idea kind of stems from some theosophist type things that I was finding recently. But I do believe that the research is still relevant because I think that this is a worldview that these Gnostic elites actually do believe in and are trying to initiate us into and have us believe. I think they're trying to make us believe in their same worldview, if that makes sense.
I think it does. I think they're trying to symbolically represent these ideas through the black cube and the tesseract, which you said. I think it was in one of your interviews. It's in some of these very famous films, Interstellar, Avengers. It's actually in two films that I've done an analysis of: Eyes Wide Shut and what's the other one? Rosemary's Baby. She's literally lying down on a tesseract with her head on a tesseract. Yeah, go watch it. There's a tesseract pillow. Yeah, no, there's a tesseract pillow. And then when the main character from Eyes Wide Shut, who is what's his name? He's walking down the stairs like into the representation of hell, and there's a lamp above him as a tesseract. So it's symbolic of total control of the individual.
Right.
That's what the symbol is in kind of like the occult. So the occultists know, like, hey, we're controlling you, but you don't even know it.
Right. I think it's like that worldview is kind of a form of mind control. It's like they're trauma-based MK Ultra in a way because so another one of these famous movies is Arthur C. Clarke's 2001: A Space Odyssey. Instead of a cube, it's that giant monolith, right? And in the movie, it's Jupiter where they find this black monolith, but it was originally supposed to be Saturn. They just changed it last minute for whatever reason. But that movie is actually, there's plenty of different ways to decode it, but in my opinion, I think that movie is actually about the birth of the moon child. You have that cosmic baby that's born out of the monolith. And so it's interesting that you're telling me that Rosemary's Baby had, a tesseract in it, because I just recently found out that there's supposedly a connection between Project Monarch and the Tesseract itself, because in order to mind control someone, you have to fracture the psyche and basically destroy their reality, kind of making them in this like dream-like multiverse type world, which would kind of be what's inside this Tesseract. But either way, besides all of that, that's something I'm still fleshing out.
It's interesting. So they're using that cube, that kind of, and actually it was used by Led Zeppelin in their album Presence, I think. The same kind of monolithic, strange, mysterious box.
Yeah.
Like if you see the black cube, it's mysterious to the uninitiated or people who wouldn't have this information, much like the monolith, right? It conveys this kind of very creepy, strange thing. And it's actually 11 feet tall in the book, in Arthur C. Clarke's book, which is really off the charts. Like the number of the New World Order. So it's in there. And its dimensions are 9, 3, and 1, which is very strange as well. So.
But yeah, just to finish that thought, I found out recently that Crowley apparently gave credit to a guy named Charles Howard Hinton for laying the foundations for occult science and the Moonchild ritual, which is like kind of a mind-controlled homunculus or a super soldier or a, just a slave, or even, I think the Moonchild is supposed to, like the ultimate Moonchild is supposed to be the Antichrist. So Charles Hinton, he's the guy who invented the Tesseract and was one of the first people to study the fourth dimension very seriously. And so Crowley says that in order to birth a Moonchild, you have to pull a soul out of the fourth dimension and put it inside of a human embryo. And I just thought that was super interesting, because if you take a Tesseract and pull it down into 3 dimensions, you actually get a honeycomb. And supposedly part of this Project Monarch is honeycombing someone's mind to mind control them and put altars in them, which is yeah. And then he also said that the place in his book Moonchild, he said that the place where they are creating these moon children was called the butterfly net, which goes back to Monarch as well, the Monarch butterfly.
Right. Wow. So he even used that. That's incredible. Wow. I didn't know that part of the Moonchild. And that was kind of like the butterfly was what they used when Leonard Lake and Ing were like doing the most horrific things, was based on, I think, a book about the butterfly, like a captured butterfly. So is that a Tesseract right there? Does that look to you like a Tesseract on the door?
Oh yeah, yeah. The cube within the cube within a cube.
Yeah. So this movie is much creepier. And when you understand this movie, see, Guy is in on it from the beginning, her husband. And once you understand the symbolism, it all comes out. So the deeper levels of this film are really remarkable, because he's offering her up to be the, mother of the Antichrist. It's really incredible. Yeah. So anyway, sorry to interrupt, but yeah.
No, you're all good.
There's, I think, another one where she lays down on a pillow and there's a Tesseract too.
Really but the reason I say that I don't necessarily believe we live in a simulation anymore is just because it's kind of a godless, nihilistic worldview. And I believe that they do want us to live in a simulation, and I think we kind of already are through the black scrying mirror that is your cell phone. So I think this is the true, the cell phone, the computer, whatever technology in general is the actual Tesseract dimension that is frying people's brains and breaking down their consensus realities. They're fracturing us all into, they're fracturing the collective psyche and pretty much siphoning all of us off into our own little different dimensions in a way. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, I don't believe that there's actually a multiverse. I think that the multiverse is like this weird Discordian metaphor for everyone living in their own separate reality, because, you could be in the grocery store and standing next to someone who lives in a completely different reality than you now, because, there's people that live in the reality where everything's falling apart and COVID is this huge disaster and it's so deadly. And then there's people that are like, yeah, everything's fine. So they literally are breaking down consensus reality. And that was the goal of the Discordians. So.
Wow, it's incredible. Yeah, so here's the Tesseract pillow, square within a square within a square. So she literally puts her head down on it, and she's wearing "Yes, I Can." I mean, it's something else, because in this sequence she puts her book above an occult book. Yeah, or I forgot what it was. Yeah. Anyway.
Sorry, I was just noticing there was a Mother Goddess statue right above it too, like Pandora and her box.
Wow. See, so there you go. Wow. So that's got to be deliberate, don't you think?
Yeah.
Let's go back there. So like that's the funny thing about this whole movie is everything looks so subtle, but then you realize somebody went through and put in all these things for real purpose. Yeah. So people can check out I did that with Sean McCann, the analysis of Rosemary's Baby, all visual, 2 parts. Sorry, but anyway, so the Tesseract is real. It's around. It really is, yeah. And the black cube, so many representations around all this Hellraiser. The Hellraiser stuff is really incredible, isn't it? Didn't they use the black cube? And that guy's like an occultist, the guy who did Hellraiser. I forgot the guy who wrote it. His name.
I forget too, but yeah, I believe he is an occultist. It's a super weird movie. You know, they essentially take this like Rubik's Cube type thing to summon demons from hell. And so what I've related this whole like black cube, this black cube, like Tesseract, all this stuff, you know, the cell phone, the madness that is inside of the cell phone, like the conspiracy world, like, you know, you could be totally inside of your cell phone world and believe that there's zombies running around, Nazis in the streets, UFOs in the air, and all this stuff, and you're just going crazy. But if you actually go outside and touch the grass, like none of that shit's happening. You know what I mean? So I really believe that like I said, I believe that this is like part of a massive initiation into their, you know, it's a false initiation into their like a new occult religion. Kind of like the Orphic Mysteries, you know, we're being dragged into the psychological underworld, Chapel Perilous, whatever you want to call it, through this cognitive dissonant media that is constantly bombarding us every single day through our technology. And if you read Crowley and the stuff he says about the Order of the Silver Star, in order to become like an enlightened being or whatever, you know, I don't actually believe that, but he said in order to become an enlightened being, you have to encounter Karanzan in the abyss. And Karanzan is essentially this being that serves the purpose of totally destroying your ego and driving you insane if you choose to hold on to it. And so this insanity can appear in the form of like psychosis or schizophrenia. And I literally believe that's what's happening to people on a massive scale right now through the cognitive dissonant media that we're all being subjected to through our phones. I hope that makes sense.
It definitely does. Look at COVID's a perfect example. Look at how people got driven insane, how they got isolated. They were deliberately physically isolated, but then mentally isolated. There were battles for information. I mean, it's still coming out, but yeah, I totally believe in that. I think there's a kind of technomania, some type of injury to the deliberate manipulation of the psychosphere of human beings in the worst way, to get them to go to like one cattle pen to another cow pen. I think so. I totally agree with you. Can you explain what the Chapel Perilous is? I've heard that concept with Robert Anton Wilson, but can you explain that for people who don't know what that is?
Yeah. So Chapel Perilous originally came from Arthurian legend. It was basically this castle type thing that Sir Lancelot was enticed into going into by this witch who was trying to seduce him to take him off his quest. And, you know, she didn't succeed. He ended up escaping. But Robert Anton Wilson adopted the idea to use as a metaphor for like the psychological place that one enters when they get really deep into the conspiracy realm. And he describes it as kind of like a labyrinth or an abyss, or, you know, kind of like I feel like the MC Escher paintings or like any surrealist painting kind of describes this mental state. But basically when you're there, you start believing, oh my God, everything's a synchronicity. Everyone's an agent. The world's conspiring against me. Everything's connected, you know? So like, it's this place where everything becomes insane. And according to Wilson, the only way to get out of it is either you go mad and you don't reach enlightenment, or you become an agnostic who doesn't believe in anything but entertains all ideas. And I don't believe that at all. I think that's just a way of disassociating and checking out. And I think that's the goal. Like I said, this Karanzan ritual that's happening through conspiracy culture itself is to drive people insane and have them just mentally check out and become agnostic and more malleable and more controllable.
It's interesting. It's interesting because I've seen that. Like, this is interesting. Like, you've had on your threads on Twitter, like, we're living through Robert Anton Wilson's Illuminati cards. And that comes to when you say that, what comes to mind are the interviews I've done with flat earthers who, through what can be called conspiracy culture, they have lost all connection to reality. They don't believe in anything. So it's very easy for them to believe the earth is flat because you can't, I couldn't get one guy to believe that there were a billion people in India, that India existed. He was done. He was one of the victims of, he was totally cleansed, like totally like brainwashed or something through this culture to not believe in anything. Really was incredible. Like it was kind of scary for me actually, but it brings to mind what's happening to people through this this kind of new culture, this new edgy culture. And I think it's really a much more predominant culture. It's not a fringe culture. I think it's actually much more predominant than people would think.
I mean,
it's
gone mainstream, and like, you know, it's just so hilarious that they call them secret societies because they're not secret at all. You can go on the History Channel and they'll be talking about, oh, Oak Island and the Freemasons and the Illuminati. It's like, dude, this stuff is not actually hidden. It's being put in our face on purpose. So the idea of secrecy and some kind of mystery drags you into their weird Dungeons and Dragons game, or you're just put into your own mental kind of, like a mental prison. You know, it's ironic that people will try and unbrainwash themselves, but inadvertently brainwash themselves into a worse state of mind, a more unhealthy state of mind. And like I said, I think this is all being done on purpose. Like they're not putting the conspiracies in cartoons and movies to, it might be revelation of the method partially, but I think another layer of that is to literally create this culture of decoding and obsessing over what's next. And, you know, I think Michael Hoffman is the one who compares it to like, you know, we're living in the spectacle, but it's kind of like a freak show and everyone lines up to solve the next murder mystery and get their fix on like, yeah.
No, he did. I mean, I interviewed him. He said something like that right in his most recent book. So, which is what? Twilight Language, which I think you mentioned in one of your earlier kind of discussions. So I think he's been around a while. And I would say that Downard is a real person, according to him, because he considers Downard his mentor. So,
right.
You know, I don't know. I think you said on another show, is Downard really a real person? King Kill 33 and all that other stuff.
Yeah, so I think he was real too. I mean, people have uncovered his, his birth certificate and different things. But I was just pointing out that some people don't even know if he's real because some of the stories about him are so ridiculous. And so I think he might be a real person that's just been exaggerated and used as a tool for kind of initiating people into Twilight Language, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah. I mean, and that's, he's really one of the earlier kind of people around this stuff. Who was the other guy who actually met Oswald? He was
Kerry Thornley.
Thornley, yeah. So those guys are kind of the early kind of conspiracy underground. Thornley and Downard, and Thornley is incredible. Like he actually wrote a book, like you said, a fictional book about Oswald before 1963. And served with him, I think, at Sugi, right, in Japan, if I remember correctly.
I don't remember where it was, but yeah, they served together.
Yeah.
And then he was questioned by the FBI after Oswald supposedly killed Kennedy. And, you know, at the time, Thornley was like, yeah, I had no idea about any of this, but his brain was so fried from acid and Discordianism that he ended up believing he was a Nazi clone, and the other clone was Oswald, and he believed that Robert Anton Wilson was actually his handler at one point. And then, ironically, it seems that the ultimate manifestation of Discordianism is being kind of a vagabond. Well, he ended up becoming a homeless guy, and, you know, the powers that be just didn't have any more use for him. And, you know, he just kind of fell off into obscurity. Sadly, you know, I feel bad for him. I think he was used and he didn't know it.
He didn't know it, but he definitely was one of the key members, the finders or original guys of the Discordians, right?
Yeah. He was definitely a founder. And I think that, like, there's this idea that I've been researching recently. I don't know a whole lot about it, but there is this idea of like weaponized schizophrenia where government intel agencies will exploit mental illness and create seeming synchronicities in someone's life to use them and prod them into doing some sort of agenda for them. And I feel like people like Thornley or even like Richard Shaver were people who are already a little bit off and they just put things on their path and kind of use them to insert certain ideas into the zeitgeist under the guise of like, oh, they were just crazy artists, they were just vagabonds, they were just, whatever, bohemians. It's funny that they use bohemians, and this all goes back to Bohemian Grove.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the people knew about him or something, that he was moving around. I think he had some kind of weird sojourn. I mean, his story is weird. Thornley, he had kind of the secret agent people surrounding him, like, so it would actually verify your view of Thornley, because he had people with the names that weren't real people talking to him or something.
Right.
Like I think you have to go back, and his story is so bizarre. But just the fact that he was involved in the Discordianism, which is still around today, and Robert Anton Wilson and all these characters. But I think those are important, because I think that the Discord is something that the principle does suffuse conspiracy or alternate media environments. Like, people sometimes they're playing tricks on you, and there's like trickster themes in the general culture and in this culture. And like, what was the one guy who was in the culture, who was an ex-CIA agent, who seemed very normal, and then he said there's slave colonies on Mars. Like, that's a classic Discordian type trick or something. Like,
was that the Steele guy?
Yeah, Robert David Steele, I think is his name. Yeah, supposedly ex-CIA too, right? So
I don't believe there's a such thing, but yeah, as soon as I hear ex-CIA, I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, so Mark Phillips was another one of these ex-CIA dudes that was like always around this lady named Kathy O'Brien, and she was like one of the first people to start writing about Project Monarch and claim she was like some kind of sex slave who had woken up from her programming thanks to her ex-CIA turned good guy handler, who was like, yeah, I just want to do good for the world. And so this lady was convinced that she had been in Illuminati sex trafficking rings, and was writing books about how everyone who believes that they've been MK Ultra needs to go get deprogrammed. And it's like,
it's Transformation of America, right?
Yeah. And it's like, there's just something so off feeling to me about people going and finding an Illuminati deprogrammer. Like, I just, I feel like that's part of the operation, is just driving people nuts.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing. She might be nuts, right? So she might be a schizophrenic. Ed Opperman interviewed her, and I sat in on that. And Phillips was talking in her ear about the most dangerous game, and she didn't know the answer. She had to ask her handler what really happened. So like, the most dangerous game is like elite hunting humans, right?
Yeah.
And it was just, if you go back and listen to that on Opperman, I think they exposed themselves as hucksters. Yeah. So, and she said some very lurid things, like having sex with Dick Cheney and all kinds of stuff like that. So there's a real problem there.
Right. And like, I do believe these things like that are happening, but like I don't understand fully what's going on yet, but like they discredit the real victims when they do stuff like this, and they just muddy the waters. Like, now no one knows. Like I said, it's to create cognitive dissonance, and no one knows what's real anymore. But I think that's,
and that goes back to that point. That goes back to the point of these flat earthers. They get so turned around and spinned up and wound up. They actually there's an avalanche in their reality. Their reality actually goes away. So it's very interesting. It's like the Tesseract. Like, they just believe in nothing and everything. It's crazy.
Right. We live in a multiverse in a metaphorical way. Like, there's people that live on flat Earth. There's people that live on globe Earth. There's people that live on hollow Earth. There's people that live in a simulation. Like, they've literally destroyed consensus reality.
Yeah, it's true. There's going to have to be new pronouns, not just the pronouns of like what gender you are, but what reality are you in?
What reality are you
William
from?
Ramsey, globe. Nick Hinton, flat. Joe Blow, simulation.
Right.
Oh man. Anyway, that's where we're at. It's crazy, man. So Discordianism all around, and I mean, we're still kind of like being like, and I think you make an interesting point, and Hoffman does too. We're sucked into unpacking and finding these Easter eggs or goose eggs in these films and books, And that's a whole culture in itself, right? Like that's it. Like that's kind of like, and so the creators of the culture are putting these things into the mass media or films just for that reason, because they know that they're going to get people who are going to
Exactly.
try to take it apart. Yeah.
Yeah, so my opinion is that like they obviously know that there's going to be smarter people and dumber people. No offense, but I think they already have accounted for the fact that, hey, high IQ people are not going to be super interested in watching a fiction TV show. But if we could convince them that there's some sort of mystery to solve within the TV show, we can distract them just as easily.
Right.
So they have people chasing their own tails, taking even more time on the show than they would if they were just watching it. They think they're uncovering some mystery when really they're kind of initiating themselves into their language of symbolism. So
Right. So you learn all that stuff. You're not an insider, but you're still watching all that stuff. So you're not,
yeah,
you're still kind of on the porch, but you're not the insider
and when
to
you
the plot.
believe it's actually true, you start to get indoctrinated into their worldview. Like when I was decoding films and stuff, I was under the impression that they were trying to secretly reveal to us that we live in a simulation. Like I said, I don't believe that's the case at all anymore, but I think they do want people to be mentally checked out and believe that reality's fake, because this is a form of mind control. It's disassociation. It's living in la la land.
Right. And I think that they're able to do it. I mean, you can get to the more extreme level. I do believe that there are operations like Deep Dream and things like that where they are literally able to zap people through the internet. Like they find like the easily hypnotized people or the easily motivated. And I think like this, some of these more recent shooters were that. The one guy in Buffalo, New York, that one guy,
Yes,
and then
dude.
Primo or whatever.
Dude, I was just going to bring up the Buffalo shooter. He was worshiping the murder cube, which was a giant black cube made of guns. It's a real art installation. I forget what the real name of the actual art piece is, but people on 4chan were worshiping the murder cube. And this guy's manifesto is all about Saint Sandman and the murder cube. And that's what inspired him to go shoot up that. What was it, like a Tops or something like that?
Yeah, it was like just some
Like a,
kind of random like store, right? Just
yeah, yeah.
random people. He drove up there. He had some kind of so-called ex-FBI handler, right? Another ex-FBI agent
Oh my
was like
gosh. Yeah.
talking to him online. Like it's unbelievable. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's just, let me see. I think I found the black gun cube. This is it, right? The glorious murder cube.
Yeah.
Like it actually really exists.
Yep.
Wow. There it is. It's right into your theme. Yeah, so that was it. And Cremo too was another interesting guy. Like he had absorbed something online. Like he was this new person in the conspiracy culture. He had the symbolism. He had the smiley face. He seemed to know O&I kind of sigils or something. He had weird things going on. He understood kind of like he dressed up like the assassin from one of those shows, the Hitman. I think the Hitman video game. So he was influenced by all of these concepts and cultures, and he seemed to be like he cross-dressed when he did the shooting. He was dressed like a woman. He was trying not to get caught. Like he knew something about the O&A. It's really incredible. But just his stuff, the smiley face, and I saw that on the cover of your newest book. So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
seems like you kind of know about that. Yeah.
Yeah, the smiley face murders I think are tied to this whole Karanzan thing. The driving people crazy. Yeah, I think it's an invocation to Karanzan, and what Karanzan does, like I said, is like they're invoking him to do this massive like ritual to make them lose their minds. But yeah, so I tied the smiley face to Karanzan. I'm still working on this book, so I forget exactly how, but oh yeah, so in the Order of the Silver Star, which I was talking about earlier,
The
when
Astrum Argentum. Astrum Argentum. Yeah.
so when the adept meets Karanzan in the abyss, he has to he ends if he successfully makes it across, he ends up in like the city of the pyramids, which is symbolic of Egypt. And if you study Egypt, Cairo is named after the Arabic word for Mars. Mars, according to NASA, at least, I don't think this is real, probably not, but according to NASA, there's a giant crater on Mars shaped like a smiley face. And there's just all sorts of weird stuff about Mars, Karanzan, and smiley face stuff that I've put in this third book I'm working on, that people will be able to see when it's out.
Yeah, interesting. And so I think Crowley, I don't know if you know this, but he literally wrote in his autobiography that he summoned Karanzan like as a literal being and had
Yes.
some kind of like battle with him in the desert with his follower, Victor Newberg, who he dressed up like an imp or something like that. It's just all kind of crazy stuff. But yeah,
It's stupid.
Karanzan, yeah. But there was actually a Karanzan cult club. Like a Karanzan club was like a little small cult that doesn't exist anymore, but it actually did exist. Nick, we are at I got about 13 minutes before I have to run off to another interview. Do you have time to take a few questions?
Yeah.
A girl asked, what does he think of the obelisks in comparison with the cube?
Yeah, so I think the obelisks represent something. I never tried to compare the two, honestly, which is probably something I should try to do. But in my opinion, the obelisks are just the phallic representation of Osiris. And I think that ties into the Moonchild ritual. Because you have these rockets at Kennedy Space Center. We know Kennedy Space Center was made after the killing of the king ritual, killing Kennedy. And Kennedy was a representation of Osiris. So you have this phallus shaped thing shooting up at the moon. Anyways, yeah, that's a whole other topic that is very convoluted, and I'll talk about it at more length in my next book.
Yeah, but those obelisks are all over the world. I mean, they're everywhere. DC,
Right.
there's one in downtown Buenos Aires. You actually could do a study on how many, you know, those kind of structures there are. There's tons.
Yeah, so
They're
they're mainly,
everywhere.
yeah. The thing I find interesting about them is that they're all at the three places in the world that are inside of countries they're not a part of, like Vatican City, Washington D.C., and what is the
City of London.
Yeah, City of London, exactly.
City of London, yeah.
Which are supposedly the three branches of the Illuminati: the banking branch, the military branch being the U.S., and the religious branch being the Vatican.
And if you read my book, Prophet of Evil, Crowley specifically did a ritual in front of what was called Cleopatra's Needle or the obelisk at a certain time date for a certain meeting with different ethnicities to announce like the arrival of the new age. Really, really interesting. You can just imagine. He loved to do these public displays. He probably was the first kind of mass ritual type person to do these things publicly to get attention and to bring it on. So when he tore up his passport in the New York harbor, it got all over the news. The New York Times picked him up and all this other stuff. Like he knew how to get people to watch that stuff. Shelley asked, is the D-Wave computer cube shaped?
Yeah, it's a giant black cube.
Wow, there it is. And some of those are all cubes, right? Some of the early Apple stuffs were flat out cubes. I don't know if they're all black, but
yeah, there's the NEXT computer. That's actually where the World Wide Web was created in a giant black cube computer at CERN. And www is va 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 or 666. So like I said, this black mirror that we all hold, the scrying mirror, is a portal, in my opinion, into another dimension, like where these different spirits live. And I think we just call them AI. They're technically electromagnetic beings. And the internet is, in a sense, another dimension because it's a space that me and you are in right now. We're together in this space, but we're in two different actual spaces. So it is like a bridge into that fourth timeless dimension in some kind of way.
It really is. Wow. It's really remarkable. Drone asks, do you think people's mass collective consciousness can have an effect on reality?
100%. And I think what, my third book is called The New World Disorder and the Totalitarian Takeover of the Reality Invaders. So I think that these beings, that people call aliens and stuff like that, are actually, they're like mind viruses or ideas that possess people into becoming ambitious and just needing to put them out there. Like Lovecraft, he had all these dreams about these great old ones and he needed to put pen to paper and make these things a reality. And once they were a reality in a book, people, the idea spread from person to person to person who read the book. And now we have things like quantum computers, D-Wave, which the creator himself, Gordy Rose, has said, oh yeah, like the idea of these quantum computers being way smarter than humans is inspired by the great old ones. These are, we're going to be summoning beings that are way, way more intelligent about us, and they won't give a shit about us, which is a terrifying concept. But yeah, so I do think that magic is essentially transmuting fiction into reality. And when like I said, I think the sorcerers are being tricked into breaking the fourth wall for these beings by putting all these ideas into movies and media and stuff. They are hacking our collective unconscious, so we manifest these things into reality for them. If you're interested in how AI and cybernetics fits into all this, search up what a hyperstition is. Nick Land said that a hyperstition is essentially an idea that wills itself into reality, and it uses humans as the vessel, but they are separate from us. And he compares them to the great old ones as well. So all these like accelerationists, transhumanists, they're all freaking weirdos, and they're into the occult. There's this whole movement.
Land is definitely, he knows everything about the ONA. He knows the Order of Nine Angles very well.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure he's associated with the Dark Enlightenment movement, which is like some kind of Ophite Gnostic sect, that wants to destroy the world, but
he's an accelerationist. Wow, I didn't know it was that bad. What was his book, Thirst for Annihilation? I forgot what it was. Yeah. Land keeps coming up in my conversations with people. It's interesting. He's always popping up. I never knew his name until I started researching the ONA.
What's interesting to me, though, is that like accelerationism and transhumanism goes all the way back to the first guy to stare into the abyss, which was Nietzsche. He had the Übermensch, the Superman, and he also was famously quoted saying, like, if something's already falling, give it a push. And in my opinion, that's accelerationism to a T.
Right. Yeah. And they're all influenced by Nietzsche too. Nietzsche pops up all the time. Lachlan asks, have you heard of if the black cube is connected to meteorites? Do you know anything about that?
I've heard a little bit about that. Yeah. So originally, the cube is kind of like the polished philosopher's stone. And apparently a lot of these cubes are, there's myths and legends surrounding them where it's like, yeah, some kind of black meteorite fell to the earth. And that was the gross version of the philosopher's stone. Some magical thing that came from heaven. And once it was polished, they perfected it to make a cube. The Masons actually have this concept. I forget what the hell it's called. It's you can search up like Freemason cube or tesseract or something. You might find it, but it shows like this giant stone being carved into a perfect cube. And that's like the great work,
Right. Wow. It all comes together. Wow. And the Masons love their like whole, Ashlard stories.
Yeah, that's exactly
in between the stones. There's that famous speech semi-famous speech that Obama gave over the reflecting pool, where he said, "It's not just the stones; it's what's in between these stones." It's just like every Mason probably just kind of nodded. Yeah, know exactly what you're talking about. Let's see. I have another question here.
Just to add to that real quick, I think the reason for all of this, like, this Karanzan thing I keep talking about, how they're trying to drive all of humanity crazy and break down the collective ego as a whole. I think this is part of, like, Hoffman talks about this, transmuting all of humanity into the Philosopher's Stone. So first they need to break us down and, separate us into polarized opposites so they can synthesize the two sides. So, like, I think that this whole liberal versus or normie versus conspiracy theorist thing, or liberals versus conservatives thing, has been totally socially engineered as a part of that, if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. It totally makes sense. It's the syncretization. That's my understanding of why they had the Twin Towers and then the Freedom Tower after, is because it represented that coming together, that synthesization. Really, the kind of fundamental magical premises of opposites coming together, bringing things together.
Right.
SB Alger asks, what's the healthiest thing a person can do who's already deep but doesn't want to go nuts down the 1001 rabbit holes? Do you have any thoughts?
I don't think people will agree with me, but that's okay. I think it's just reading the Bible, touching grass, and spending time with people you love and care about.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, what's that thing? There's that famous phrase in all of social medias, is go sit on grass, or what is it?
Yeah, go touch some grass. Go touch
some grass. Yeah, it's smart. Shelley asked, does Nick believe what people call interdimensional beings are manifestations of the imagination?
Yeah, I think they're tulpas and thought forms, and that the mythologies that these occultists and sorcerers have subjected us to are what is forcing us to shape things in certain ways. And I think that the original mind virus or mimetic like informational life form that invaded our reality was language, because we were taught language by if you go back through the ancient cultures, they say it came from the beings from the sky. Well, if you relate that to the Bible, these are fallen angels. And so we are speaking a fallen language, and this fallen language is what is transmitting these different types of thought forms back and forth. And yeah, civilization as a whole seems to be a manifestation of these things. And, in this book, I go into great detail about how I think this originally started with Plato's perfect forms. I think they've been trying to channel those things into our reality in the form of machines and computers, and these perfectly geometric shaped buildings and stuff like that. And like temples themselves are kind of like alphanumeric labyrinths that use sacred geometry to channel these quote unquote gods. And yeah, sorry, that's a long rant for a simple question, but
No, it's interesting. And then John B asked, can the occult control of our future be stopped or slowed without violence, obviously?
I honestly, I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I mean, I truly believe in the Bible at this point. It's the only thing that makes sense to me anymore. And I think it's kind of all inevitable. And the point is to let go and just seek God. I don't think we're going to figure out the answers. There's no intellectual closure at the end of any of this. I think it's just about being a good person and having faith. And yeah, I mean, everyone who's ever tried to figure it out never has. They drive themselves crazy. And the world has literally always, always, always been like this. There's always been groups of powerful people conspiring to do something. There's always been people being like, hey, we figured it out. We're going to do something. And you know what? Every time something happens where people seemingly change their circumstances, the facade just changes and it continues on and on like it always has. So I don't think the point is to be living in utopia here and now. I think it's to just get through this test and pass.
Amen. Amen. That's a great way to end it. Where's the best place for people to see your material, Nick?
Yeah, really just my Twitter and my Instagram. I used to have a website, but I kind of messed it up real bad. I don't understand HTML coding that well. So that's something I'm still working on. So right now it's just Twitter and Instagram, which are both NickHinton.
Right. So the double N at the end. So at Nick Hinton.
Yeah, some jerk named Nick Hinton stole my username. So
I'm sorry to hear that. And you've done a lot more research. You can look at his threads. I barely got through any of them. There was just a lot of information still on Twitter. And where's the best place for people to get your book?
Just shoot me a DM. I do it all myself. I self-publish, self-print, and mail them out myself. And I can sign them if you want me to, or put a note, whatever. That's the reason I do it that way. I also just don't like Amazon. So right now it's all through myself. I might eventually move over to some other kind of platform, but currently, if you're interested in buying it, just send me a DM on Twitter or Instagram.
Gotcha. So that's the best place to reach you too. They can find you on Twitter, right?
Yes.
Twitter and Nick Hinton. And then your new book's coming out, The New World Disorder. When do you think you'll publish that?
I'm hoping for it to be out literally by the end of this week.
Oh wow! Congrats. That's soon. Oh.
Thank you, man. Yeah, I'm wrapping up.
Come back on,
yeah, thank you, man. I'm just wrapping up the last chapter and adding some pictures and stuff while I go through different, just spelling errors and stuff like that. So it's just about done.
Cool. Congrats. And that's The New World Disorder and the Totalitarian Takeover of the Reality Invaders. So people.
Yes, sir.
That. And then the earlier two books are the Saturn Time Cube Simulation and the Aquarian Singularity. And it's Nick D. Hinton, Hinton. Thanks so much for your time, Nick.
Thank you, man.
Appreciate it. All right, take care.